We are very delighted to have a most popular and valued Atlanta writer with us tonight. Patricia Sprinkle grew up in North Carolina, but she's lived much of her life in and around Atlanta. And during that time, she's become a most prolific writer. Over the last 25 or so years, she's written 20 mystery novels, 4 non-mystery novels, and 5 nonfiction books. And in the process, she has sold thousands of books and made at least as many fans all over the country. Just a few years ago, she made a big decision. She had written all those mysteries and had come to realize that she didn't want to write any more of them. And so she stopped. And she began writing novels of quite a different sort. Hold Up the Sky, a family story grounded in faith, was the first last year. And now we have a wonderful new novel called Friday's Daughter, just published last week. It is another story about family, once again rooted in quiet values, all about caregivers and providing for the elderly. We are both pleased and very proud to have Patricia Sprinkle back with us at the Georgia Center for the book. Please join me in welcoming her now.
Thank you, Bill. I'm shorter than Bill. It is great to be with you tonight. I always love coming to the Georgia Center for the book, and this is a special time. I do get to tell you about my new book. Thank you for letting me come, Bill. Some of you have already heard me say things about me at other events, and so I will just tell you briefly that I was 13 when I decided to become a writer. Up until then, I was going to be a surgeon. I had, in fact, at 5, I had informed my 2 best friends that they should become nurses for my hospital. Not our hospital, you understand, my hospital. And they actually both did, so that was pretty cool. But at 13, I went to a civics class where we had to report on a profession, and I missed class the day the teacher assigned it. You ever done that? That's pretty fatal. I got back, and she said, medical field is covered. Got to do something else. And I didn't know what to do, but she had a box of little booklets over in the corner that some people had chosen out of already. In fact, they had chosen most of them already. And when I got there, there were 3 booklets left. There was farmer, mortician, and writer. Well, my sense was that writers were dead people, so I didn't know quite what to do with that one, but I love to read, and I thought, well, I'll report on being a writer. I thought that was going to say, you write books, you die, and they publish your books. And instead, the man in the book, and I wish I knew who he was, because he said that writers got to take stories out of their heads and put them on the paper, said that people like to read your stories, said you got to travel, said you got to do research, all these things I love to do, and you got to write, which I really love to do. And my gut feeling there at 13 years old was not, I want to be a writer, but I'm a writer. And I never really looked back. I have friends who started writing later than that, but for me, that was when I wanted to do it. So I went to college, learned to be a writer, learned a little bit about it anyway, learned to write those really esoteric short stories that nobody understands, and they get great reviews because the reviewers don't understand them either, and they don't want you to know that. So I wrote those stories for a little while and got out of college and saved my money for a year. And when I think about it now, I realize what a gutsy thing it was. At the time, it just seemed very logical, but I set off with 1 suitcase and a portable typewriter and 2 coats and $750 for Scotland, not knowing a soul in Scotland or where I was going, but planning to stay for 6 months. And I wound up staying 7. I fell in love with it and remarkably got to sell a few things, and sold my first poem and my first short story, and sold an essay, and then I got an interview with the BBC. The reason was because my parents lived in Miami at the time, and they wanted an interview with the daft American who had come to Scotland for the winter from Miami. That's what they were calling me, the daft American. So I did that, and then for 22 years after that, I came back to this country and moved to Atlanta in 1968. Came to Atlanta as a young adult to work for a publisher, and I edited trade publications. There's nothing more exciting than editing magazines with titles like Non-Foods Merchandising, Convenience Store Journal. And I did that for a while, and then I worked for the Presbyterians for a while, and then I did a lot of writing for World Hunger for a long time. And one day my husband looked at me and looked at our budget, and he said, why don't you write a mystery to pay for the ones you keep buying? Now, that's what I read. I don't know about you, but I have to admit, if I have a stack of really good novels and one mystery, I will read the mystery first, just in case I die before I get to it. So I'm likely to be, reading the mystery. And so for 20 years, immediately when he said that, I knew what I wanted to write. There was a man I had worked for while he was finishing his degree, his doctorate. There was a man he had worked for that I really disliked, and I thought, I'm going to put a body in that man's basement. I didn't kill him. I just let him be a suspect. He never suspected a thing. But, I hope he doesn't hear this. But anyway, so I did do that. And for 20 years, I did write 20 mysteries and some nonfiction books and 2 more other novels. And I loved it. It was a lot of fun. But about 4 years ago, 3 things happened. One was that the woman who had inspired one set of my mysteries had to be put into a memory care facility, and then she died. And it wasn't fun to write them anymore because I had been sending them to her, and she would read them, and she'd tell me what was right about them and what was wrong about them. And she'd say, I'm getting more like McLaurin Yarborough every day, and, she was great. And so when Mildred Ann was gone, it wasn't as much fun. And then my own mother had to be put in a memory care facility. And I realized that memory does not come with a lifetime guarantee. And that if we're going to do something, if there's something we really, really want to do, we'd better do it while we can, because we don't know how long we will have a good memory to do it with. In fact, we were talking just beforehand, some of our memories are beginning to slide already a little bit, so it's good if we do what we're going to do. And then also, all my friends were retiring. They were writing and saying, I've retired from teaching, I've retired from baking. And I thought, okay, I'll retire from writing mysteries and write novels. So that's what I did. I want to tell you a little bit about the novel Friday's Daughter. Now, both Hold Up the Sky and Friday's Daughter are told from the perspective of a younger sister. How many of you are younger sisters or brothers? Okay. How many of you are older sisters or brothers? Yes, well, I was the older of 2 sisters, and my younger sister has informed me that if I think that writing 2 novels from the perspective of the younger sister is going to atone for all the things I did to her all those years, I can think again. 2 novels will not be enough. But anyway, I did write it from that. And Friday's Daughter deals with what happens to a woman when all her dreams disappear. And that's really what happens to teensy Deborah McAllister in this novel. That's the central question. And this book is based on a fairy tale. I'm going to tell you a real quick fairy tale. Once there was a king who had 3 daughters. One was brilliant. One was beautiful. One was neither brilliant nor beautiful, but she loved to help people. Now, one day, a very brilliant prince rode in, and he married the brilliant princess, and he took her to a kingdom where everyone was brilliant. And one day, a handsome and rich prince rode in, and he married the beautiful daughter and took her to a kingdom where everyone was rich and beautiful. And the 3rd daughter persuaded her father to let her become a nurse. And she went to a faraway city and worked helping people. But her father sent her a message and said, your aunt is ill. The old princess needs you. And because she loved her sister, her aunt, she went and cared for her aunt until her aunt died. And then her mother was ill, and she cared for the queen until the queen died. And then her father said, do you have any desires? And she said, yes, I would like a place someday where I could take in older people who are poor and care for them in their last years. And he said, I'll make you a deal. If you will stay with me until I'm gone, I will leave you my castle and enough money to make that happen. Now that's a fairy tale, but this is a story about real people. It's about a man named King McAllister, who was the president of a college up in North Georgia mountains. And his 3 daughters, Susan, who's married to Albert, who is the current president of the college. Susan is a poet, a very professional woman, and a medieval literature specialist. And then there's Reagan, the 2nd daughter, who is beautiful and married to a chicken czar up in Dalton. And then there is teensy Deborah, who was sort of the afterthought in the family. Her sisters were 8 and 6 when she was born, and they made it very clear from the time she was little that she was an insignificant appendage to this royal family. And she's little. They're tall, big women, stunning women. And she's this little, smaller person with hazel eyes and reddish hair instead of black hair. And so Teensy has been a nurse, and for the last 15 years, she has cared for her aunt and her mother and her father. And the book begins on the day when her father's will is to be read. And Teensy waits with anticipation because she knows her sisters are going to get a surprise. The lawyer pulled out the expected document. Since Mrs. McAllister preceded Dr. McAllister, the will is straightforward. He began reading the legalese that always precedes the gist. I trembled as he approached the important sentence. I leave everything of which I die possessed to all my children in equal shares. No! That couldn't be me. I was too numb to wail. I felt like I had walked into a familiar room only to step into an unexpected hole that plummeted me to a dark, chill basement. I swayed and had to put a hand on Mother's drum table to steady myself. Nobody noticed. Wonder, her little 4-year-old great-niece, voiced the protest I could not. No, no, no! She flew across the room to pound the lawyer's knee with fists like small mallets. The king promised his house to the third princess so she could take care of people in it. Hey, hold on, with a laugh, he caught her wrist to keep her from hitting him. Wonder tugged to get free. The youngest princess gets the castle. Wonder, her grandmother rebuked her. Gage kept Wonder's wrists but held them loosely. I'm sorry, sweetie, but that's not what Dr. McAllister's will says. Wonder set her jaw. The youngest princess is supposed to get the castle. Gage looked to his grandfather, the old judge, for reinforcement. With an unerring instinct for where the power lay, Wonder moved to stand in front of the judge. Hands clasped behind her, she explained in an earnest voice, Mr. Judge, the youngest princess is supposed to get everything because she took care of the old princess and the queen when they were sick, and she took care of the king even if she didn't love him, just respected and admired him. Her grandfather choked. Wonder, her grandmother rebuked her again. She paid them no attention. She was intent on her mission. So you has to give the castle and everything to Teensy. She is not brilliant or beautiful, but she likes to help people, and she wants to help them in this house. Unfortunately, her sisters are not willing to give up their shares of the estate. And therefore, you have Teensy McAllister at 40, having deferred her life for 15 years, thinking she was working toward a dream, only to discover how little her sisters value what she did. They say, well, you didn't do much. You just lived here and got free room and board all these years. And she lists it. Have any of you ever been a caregiver? Some of you have. And you basically exchange your life for their life for a time, don't you? We've been in that since 2002. First my husband's mother, and then my mother, and now my father. And we're delighted to have relatives who live to 95 and 97 years old. But on the other hand, it does mean that you exchange a big chunk of your life for their life. And so this is a question that Teensy has to deal with. What am I going to do next? What am I going to do next? She has to recreate her life. And what she does is something that her sisters consider so outrageous that one of the sisters writes and says, if it was possible to divorce a sister, I would. Teensy discovers something interesting, and that is she discovers that she was stuck. I don't know if you've ever been stuck, but one of the central themes, people sometimes say, where do you get an idea for a book? And for me, this idea came in an image of a car getting stuck on a muddy road on the hill. And Wonder and Teensy and her friend Coco are going up the hill, and as they're going up the hill, the Cadillac gets stuck. We made it through a runoff and up another rise, but as I started downhill, a startled rabbit dashed across the road. Instinctively, I jerked the wheel to avoid it, and the rear of the Cadillac slid into soft red mud. When I floored the accelerator, I felt the back rear tire sink deeper. Have you ever had that feeling? By the time I'd pushed the car out with the assistance of Wonder, my clothes were dotted with mud. You want to go on or back home, Coco asked as she slid over to relinquish the steering wheel. There seems to be a turnaround ahead. Nothing would suit me better than to go back, but we have to go on, I said. So they go up, and she takes care of a patient. Teensy is a nurse, so she's caring for a patient up on this muddy hill. And on the way back, as we started down the mountain, Wonder exclaimed, "There's our stucking place." Sure enough, we were at the place where our car had gotten stuck. "You mean the sticking place," I corrected her. Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror with the look children give adults who have managed to live so long in ignorance. "It's a sticking place if you stick a little, Teensy. It's a stucking place if you get stuck and can't get out. If you're in a stucking place, you can't do nothing till you get unstuck." And Teensy discovers that she's stuck, and her sisters are stuck. They've all had these same attitudes for years and decades of their lives. And so in a real sense, this is a book about people who get unstuck. And so Teensy changes herself. She does something very outrageous, very unbelievable to her family. And as she, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, you have to read the book. But anyway, as she does this, she discovers that her family begins to be unstuck as well. And this is the story of 3 sisters and their father, the king. I'm going to stop here now and ask for questions, and then if you ask a question, I may go on and on about that. Does anybody have a question? Maybe a little bit, maybe by the awareness that other people are not aware of the involvement of caregiving unless they've done it. I remember my father said that at one point because he cared for my mother with her Alzheimer's at home for a long time. And he said nobody knows about it until they've done it. So yeah, in a sense, I hope to create some respect for caregivers through this story, to give some flavor of what it involves, but that's not all it is. But yeah, that may have been part of it. The real inspiration came from that stuck concept, though, the idea that we get stuck in something, and what does it take to unstick us? For one thing, writing mysteries is easier because when things begin to get dull in the book, you can always throw in a body. I really miss that. I have to admit, I miss that writing a novel because you could always with mysteries too. For me, and I know some people say the characters matter the most, but for me in a mystery, the plot really matters the most. And so I put the characters into place, but I try to make sure the plot is strong and carries the story. I don't know about you all, but I can easily forget the name of characters sometimes, but I seldom will forget a plot. So I find that it's a little harder to create a plot in a novel than it was to create plots for mysteries. Mysteries you also write backwards. And by that, I mean 2 things. One is that I always have to know the end before I know the beginning. Whereas in a novel, I know sort of where they're going, but I have to work my way to get there, as opposed to the mystery, which I pretty much have plotted out completely before I start. But also sentences, like in there's some things that you don't want to do in a regular book. You don't want to start a sentence with the word walking or standing or something, because that sort of slows the reader down. But in a mystery, you want to do as many things as you can to slow the reader down so they don't notice the clues you're putting into that part of the sentence. You want to write parts of the sentence they're not going to read, that they're going to pass over to get to the real part of the sentence, and that's where you stick your clues in. So then I had to relearn to write forward again and not throw in clues because I didn't have a death. Now, Hold Up the Sky actually does have a little mystery and a body in it, right? And I said, well, this book doesn't have anything like that. And somebody said, but it begins with King McAllister's funeral. So I guess, I can't get away from dead people. I just seem to have this fascination with dead people. I'm supposed to be repeating the questions here, and I have totally forgotten to do that. So let me back up, and then I'm going to get to yours. The first question had to do with whether my own caregiving experience affected things. And the second one was, what's different about writing mysteries and novels? And now you're asking, do I really see them as 2 different things? I think mystery is sort of a subset of novels. I always say that I write mystery novels because I do believe they are novels. They certainly have character, and they have plot, and they have setting, and they have place, and they have duration, and a beginning and an end. They have all the things a novel has. They have the added puzzle. The ones that I do are not the suspense books, they are the puzzle books. So I add a puzzle there that I hope when you pick up one of my mysteries, I'm betting you cannot figure it out, and you're betting me you can. So I always feel like there's a dialogue going on between the reader and the writer. So that would be, I guess, the only distinction I would make between them. But they're all novels. You're absolutely right. Good point. Well, I came up with the title pretty early, although I was originally going to call it Friday's Child. And I realized there were other books out there called Friday's Child, and I decided maybe Friday's Daughter would be a little better than that for me. But there's that poem which appears in the beginning of the book, which is that Monday's child is fair of face, Tuesday's child is full of grace, Wednesday's child is what? Loving and no, that's Friday's child. Wait a minute. Wednesday's child is full of woe, Thursday's child has far to go, Friday's child is loving and giving. And it's an old nursery rhyme. And Saturday's child, which is what I am, works hard for a living. And so, it's really true. If you know what day you're born, then everything else follows from that. But anyway, so that was when I decided to call it Friday's Daughter. It was hard to come up with a title, sort of. And the cover was funny because the bird in the book, the original cover was a yellow birdhouse. And I have to admit that I love that cover. And I even put a yellow birdhouse in the book. And worked the birds a little harder than I had planned to work the birds in writing the book because of the new cover. And then I got a letter last fall saying, oh dear, somebody else has chosen that birdhouse for their cover for February, and so we're going to have to come up with, not you, but they came up with another cover. And when they first sent it, I wasn't sure I liked it because I thought, oh, but I had loved that yellow birdhouse. But I think it's pretty okay now. It's this little blue bird hovering over I thought a frozen bird bath, but they assured me this purple stuff is water, not ice. So it's a little bird on that. I want to mention something tied in with that I think I need to say. Some of you may have read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution review of the book, and the woman said in it that the reviewer said that Teensy is neither a Melanie Forbes nor a Scarlett O'Hara. And I thought about that. Of course, the first day I walked around and cried all day. But the second day, I thought, those were 1930s opinions of Southern women. And this is 2011. And Southern women have come a long way since 1930. And one thing that I think is important is that now, well, let me back up. There was a scholar at Duke years ago, Anne Fuhrer Scott, who studied the Southern woman, Who Is She, was the title of one of her books. And she was saying that in the South, originally, the image for women was the Christian image of a person who is self-sacrificing and giving and kind and gentle and good. A Melanie Wilkes, right? Melanie Wilkes. Did I say Melanie Forbes originally? That was the victim in my first book. I'm sorry. Melanie Wilkes. And so and she said the image for males in the South in early days was the Greek image, heroic, violent, amoral, basically. Most of what they did was okay. The women put up with it. And this was sort of the image. Well, I think over the decades, as women have changed their roles, some women have taken on that Greek moral thing a little bit and become a little more macho. And I think there's a tendency to think that sacrifice has gone out. And yet there are people who need us to take care of them. There are still small children and elderly parents. And so I think we have to sometimes portray characters who care about other people. And then there are a lot of other people. They're the professional people. In this particular book, I think we have several different kinds of women. We have Teensy, who is at first willing to care for anybody. She was the caregiver in her family. In a family, usually the older child gets to pick their corner first, and then the next child, and the third child takes what's left. And for Teensy, in that family, nobody was a caring person. Not the father, not the mother, not Reagan, not Susan. So she took that role. That was who she was. But she never differentiated at the beginning between caring for people who needed to be cared for and caring for those people who would like to be waited on. Okay? I sometimes run into parents who I think do far too much for their children when the children would benefit from the parents letting them do some things for themselves. And that's frankly true for our elderly parents as well. Sometimes we try to do too much for them, and it's really good if we let them do what they can do. I remember years ago, a man who was like a grandfather to me had lost his wife, and his nephew had moved in with them. And I went to visit him, and I came home and said to my dad, they're making an old man out of Uncle Jim. They don't let him walk up to the mailbox anymore. They don't let him drive his truck a mile down the road to the post office. They don't let him do anything. They do it all for him, and they're making an old man out of him. And my daddy looked at me and he said, you hold that thought. And I think he was right. And now that he's 95 and slowing down a little bit, we still try to hold that thought. I pray a lot when he drives, and But anyway, it's up to him what he wants to do with his life. So you've got Teensy, the caregiver, and then you've got Susan, who I think is another modern Southern woman anywhere, but in the South maybe new, and that is the professional woman for whom her career is so important that her family really suffers because of it. She didn't do a good job raising her daughter, and it takes her little granddaughter to begin to soften her because grandchildren change us in ways we never expect. And so Susan has to do some changing. And then there's Reagan, who is the entitled woman. She, if anybody, is like Scarlett O'Hara in the book. It's Reagan, who really thinks the world owes it to her to make sure everything happens the way she wants it to happen. And so you have this entitled woman in the story. You have Monique, who is the sexy young daughter of Susan and Albert, who ran away at 16 and came back with a baby 5 years later. and who really is the rebel, and yet who is going to have to figure out where she fits in this family and in this world. So you've got all these different characters trying to come together in a story. So that's just a little sideline on that. Anything else? Yes. Who are your people is a question. Well, let me repeat what you're saying for the mic and for these others that might not hear you. He's saying that he's becoming aware that there are some core values in Southern literature and Southern culture. And one of them is place, and one of them is people. Who are your people? My mother used to joke and say, don't ever be rude to somebody in North Carolina till you figure out how you're related. And it's really true. Yeah. Where we're from, he says, has a lot to do with who we are and where we've come from, and that may be part of our Scottish heritage. I sometimes wonder, too, this sounds funny, if as rural people we weren't a little bit suspicious, and it was always helpful to know where somebody was from so we could figure out who we knew that they knew that would be a validation that they were okay for us to know. I've never known if that might be why we like to know where people are from and who your people are. Is place important? Place is very important to me in the books, and who people are connected to. In this particular book, it takes place in the North Georgia mountains. It deals partly with Cherokee. One of the joys to me of researching this book was researching what had happened to the Cherokee in North Georgia, which I knew a little bit about but didn't know as much as I need. There's some Cherokee folklore stories in the book that tie in with what it is. And that the Cherokee and the connection with the Cherokee have tied Teensy really, her whole family. Her family has the first chartered land when the land grab started in Georgia in 1830. 8 years before the Cherokee were sent away, we were already grabbing their land, and they got the first land with a gold mine on it. So they have the first charter plus a little nugget of gold from their mine. That has shaped who they were. Tobias Jones, a farmer that Teensy comes to know, is a Cherokee, and he is very quick to point out to her that it was neither her land nor her gold mine. So that shaped that. The dairy farm had to be in West Georgia, I felt like. It needed to be rooted in the dairy parts of Georgia. When I did the Atlanta books, the mysteries, the first 7 mysteries I did, 4 of them were set in Atlanta. Murder on Peachtree Street was downtown Atlanta, which is one kind of culture. Somebody's Dead in Snellville was a whole different kind of culture. Death of a Dunwoody matron dealt with Dunwoody, and what I saw was when I would go to Dunwoody and people would tell me about people that they knew, and what they always told me was she belongs to the opera, or she belongs to the country club, or she does this, or her kids are in this school. And I thought, you think you know somebody because you know what they belong to? So I just had fun creating a cul-de-sac on whom nobody was who they seemed to be, and put it smack in the middle of Dunwoody. And then Mystery Bread and Buckhead was about the Buckhead culture. And if I had continued that series, which I decided not to do, but if I had, I would have wanted to do one on Druid Hills and one on Morningside and one on Inman Park, and a whole lot of different communities, because I think the place you're in does shape a lot of who you are, and who you know, and how you relate to who you know. So I think that. There are other traits of Southern writing. One is history. We like to know not only who your people are, but who my people are and where we came from. And it's funny because we do that. We don't so much get involved in genealogy like, did we come from this little town in Germany or something, but we do want to know where our relatives were in the history of America. And that's very different from up north. We lived in Chicago, and these 2 little girls came up to me one day. Our child was 2, and he had very blonde, curly hair, and it was fairly long. And they came up to me one day and said, "What is Barnabas?" What is Barnabas? And I said, "He's a boy." And they said, "No, but what is he?" And I said, "I don't know what you mean." And they said, "We are half Italian and half Norwegian. What is Barnabas?" And I thought quickly, and I said, "He's half North Carolinian and half Alabamian." And they said, "Okay." Because that mattered to them, what European heritage, whereas for us, we're sort of all mush. And so we just sort of find our place in the mush more than, we may say we are Scottish or we are Irish, but for the most part, most of us don't have a clue where all those ancestors really came from. They probably came from, a lot of places. But there are other things. There's family, there's history, there's religion. Almost any Southern book. Even if the characters are not religious, religion will shape some of the things they do and some of the things that happen around them. I think food is very peculiar to Southern books. We like to put in what people eat. Now, sometimes you get in trouble. You get an editor who writes you, as one wrote me, what is a congealed salad? You know, so I called the Atlanta Journal-Constitution food editor, and I said, what do you call a salad with Jell-O and fruit? She said, you mean a congealed salad? I said, thank you, and hung up. I thought, yes, I was right. You know, so there is that also. And also, we have a sense of the grotesque. Sharon McCrum claims, and I think she's right, that all of us, north, south, east, west, all of us have some relatives who are pretty bizarre. But in the South, we invite them home to dinner. You know, if we have a drunk relative, we're likely to tell funny jokes about that person instead of hiding them back in a closet. And so we tell stories. We love to tell stories, and I think that's also, and that's part of why I put Cherokee stories in this book and why I had the fairy tale in this book, because we come from three strands of great storytellers. We come from the Scots and the Irish, who love to tell stories, love to read Scottish and Irish fairy tales. We come from the Jewish strand. There were a number of Jewish people in the South, and because there were so few in each town, they mixed in with the rest of the people in ways maybe they didn't do in northern cities, where there were enough of them to live in their own special neighborhoods. And so the storytelling of the Jewish people has always been wonderful. And then we grew up in a culture with the black culture, which is the African storytelling culture. And even though that may not be a part of who we are physically, it is a part of who we are culturally. And so we love to sit around and tell stories and remember stories and tell anecdotes and remember those. So that's all a part of Southern writing, I think. Yes, she asked if I did a book set in Jacksonville, Florida, and that was Deadly Secrets on the St. John's, yes. Oh, yes, my husband is going to hand out a list of all the books that are in print at this point, and that's one of them. Yes, what were you going to ask? Did you? Where'd you go to high school? She said she lived in Jacksonville, Florida. Where did you go to high school? Oh, you didn't go to high school in Jacksonville. Oh, okay. Because I did live in Jacksonville from the time I was 12 till I was 18. And it is amazing how all over the world I have met people from Jacksonville and said, where'd you go to high school? And they went to my high school, which was Robert E. Lee Senior High School. She asked if I had courses that taught techniques in mystery writing. I have to confess to you and tell you very frankly that at my college, reading mysteries was not considered by the literature department as something they wanted their students to do, okay? that was low-class reading for them. They just didn't know. They just didn't have a clue. They didn't realize that there's some of the cleverest writers of our generation have done it, have told mysteries. So no, we didn't learn to write mysteries there. You learn to write mysteries, I guess, by reading mysteries. There may be classes. Now, Jackie, J.L. Miles right over here, actually took a class in writing, Murder for Fun and Profit or something, right? Never took that class. I should have. Maybe I'd have had more fun and profit. Maybe I should teach that class, yeah. But back to the Jacksonville story, it was really funny because where a writer gets an idea is a crazy thing. Yes, Ortega. Well, we lived in Avondale when I was a child, and so, yeah, right. And so when I was writing that book, I actually got the idea for it at my husband's high school reunion in East Point, Georgia. He went to Headland High, which is no longer there. After he left, they just couldn't do any better, so they just tore it down. But at any rate, we were at his high school reunion. And so I just figured that I would write this. And I saw these ex-cheerleaders and saw that they related at 40 probably the way they had related at 17, you know? It was just bizarre. And I didn't know anybody, so I was sitting over here watching everybody. And I finally started grabbing paper napkins and making notes because there was just so much to put down in this thing. And I thought it was an Atlanta book. And I tried to put it in Atlanta, and I couldn't. I could not find a neighborhood in Atlanta, talk about place, where that story fit. And then I thought of Jacksonville and growing up at Lee High School and in Ortega and Avondale and the way the cheerleaders related there and the fact that in Jacksonville, with the exception of a very few of us, most of the girls I went to high school with either married men from Jacksonville from our high school classes, which stunned me. I looked at them and thought, well, you didn't like him when he was 15. Why do you like him now? But they married those people, or they would marry somebody from outside and bring them back to Jacksonville. And some of us didn't do that, but a large number did. And so this became the story and became the perfect setting. Now, half my high school friends think they're in the book, and the other half think I used their houses for the book, neither of which is true, but, that was funny. Yeah. I will never put a murder in a place you can identify. I don't want a copycat, okay? So I will never do that. If I've got, like in the Dunwoody book, Dunwoody itself is real, the streets are real, the Kroger was real, all the places were real, but the cul-de-sac was made up, and I don't tell you where it was. In this book, I had to make it up because I drove around and looked at Georgia mountain towns and Georgia colleges, and I couldn't find one I liked. I found a lot of them that had great, this one had this piece, and this one had this piece, and this one had that piece. I thought I was going to set it up at Reinhardt in Waleska, and I got up there and there's no town. It's just 2 buildings and the college, and so I sort of used their college, but I set it in a bigger town. So if it's something, and also usually I may change the name of a town. If it's Atlanta, I'll use the same neighborhood, but I may change. And I used a real house in a mystery bred in Buckhead because Bob and I had been to this wonderful dinner at a lovely house on West Paces Ferry Road. And I said to them, I love this house. Can I use it in a book? And they said, oh, sure. So I did. But for the most part, I'll make up the place where the main action happens, but I may set it down in the middle of a real place. And there's some real good reasons for that. I learned with Death of a Dunwoody Matron, one of the scenes takes place in a pub, McGuire's Irish pub down in Pensacola, Florida. And I was going around with my friend, a cousin actually, looking for places for things to happen for that part of the book. And we just happened to stop and have a brownie at McGuire's Irish pub. And I was fascinated with this place. It has dollar bills stapled to the walls. Everybody who comes in gives them $1 and they staple it to the walls. They have thousands of dollars stapled to their walls. You also, I just think this is such a cool Irish thing. You can buy a mug with your name on it, and then you leave it there. This man has got it all together. I mean, you give him your dollars, you give him your mugs. But I asked him, I said, could I set a scene here? And they said, oh, yes. And so I do. The detective and someone goes there to have a meal. And, it described it. And they invited me back for a signing. So there's a real practical good reason to use some real places. I think when J.L. Miles said something in her book, said All That's True, when she said it in a restaurant, that restaurant came here and gave her snacks for her launch party. I wasn't that smart. I didn't think of that. But anyway, that's sort of a differentiation for me. If it's a little town, when I was looking at Hope Moore, Georgia, I was looking for a small town in Middle Georgia for the mystery series set down there. And I decided I didn't want to use one small town because people would come in and say, well, it's not really like that or whatever. So I just made it. If you make it up, you can make it any way you want it. Somebody wrote me today and said, such and such wasn't legal in your book. And I wanted to write her back and say, it was my book. If I said it, it's legal in that book. Anyway, he was going to ask me if I knew Sharon McCrum's writing. Not only know that, I know Sharon McCrum. She's a friend. She's a wonderful writer. And she started with mysteries, sort of light, humorous mysteries, and then she moved into serious ballad books. And some of her books have literally been taught. Colleges are getting smarter now. Some of her books have been taught in college courses because of the way they get into the Appalachian roots and the Scottish connection to the Appalachian roots. So Sharon McCrum's a good person to read. Are we about done, Joe? I see you pacing back there. I think we're about finished here. We would like to invite you to come over to the room and have some wine and cheese and crackers and fruit with us. And if you want to buy a book, then I'll be glad to sign the book for you. Thank you for letting me come.